Today's mixing tip is about low cut or high pass filters. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. Now today we're going to be talking about why I use low cut or high pass filters. But before we get into that, if this is your first time here, this channel is all about home recording. It can be about DAWs, plugins, tips and tricks for mixing or gear. So if that's the kind of thing you're interested in and you'd like to hear more about, then please subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you hear about my future videos. Now, I always or almost always use high pass and low cut filters on my mix. I've been doing it for a few years now and I found it made a really big difference to my mix when I started using them. So I don't want to waffle on, let's get on to the tutorial and jump into Studio One now. Okay guys, so here we are in Studio One, but I want to emphasize it doesn't really matter which DAW you're using for this tutorial. It will work in any of them. Now I just want to clear up any confusion to begin with. There is no difference between a low cut and a high pass filter. They're two terms for the same thing. So for example, over here in Ozone, I've got one in here and it's called a high pass filter and you can see what it's doing there. If I then switch over to Fab Filter, it's called a low cut filter in Fab Filter, and it's going to be called one of those two things in whichever EQ you choose to use. Now the next thing I'd like to discuss is when you're working in these high frequencies, your ability to hear them is going to be quite dependent on a number of things. First of all, normal human hearing only goes down to about 20 hertz. Normal human hearing, but it can change with your age, any damage you've got to your ears, etc. It's also going to depend on which equipment you're using. The frequency range of the speakers that you're using. So those are important considerations when you're working in this area. Keep them in mind. The other thing I want to mention really quickly is that although some frequencies in the low end cannot be heard by the human ear, they can be felt, physically felt, when they're played loud enough through some loudspeakers. So that's another consideration. It may depend on the genre of music you're producing as to whether you want those frequencies to be felt or not. So it's just a consideration to keep in mind when working in the low end. And it's for that reason why I don't by default put low cut filters at any particular frequency on every single track. You need to do it on an instrument by instrument basis, a song by song basis. In general, it's just best not to do anything by default in the mixing process. So moving on to why would I use a high pass or low cut filter? Well, of course, there's the obvious reason that they may be frequencies in that instrument in the low end that for particular reason you don't want to hear. That's a sort of an artistic choice that you're making about the sound of your track. But that's not my primary reason for using a high pass filter. The primary objective of using a high pass filter in this case is to get better results from your mix overall. Now, why would it be that taking out sounds that you can't even hear would affect the mix overall? Well, let's have a look and see. I've got an example in here of a sine wave, and it's playing at 10 hertz. Now, you won't be able to hear this because it's outside of the range of human hearing. It is actually pretty loud, but you won't be able to hear it. Now, the interesting thing about this is what you're going to see is that although you can't hear it, the computer itself can hear it. So I'll just pull that up. I'm also going to pull up a compressor which I've actually got in the signal chain on the sine wave. Now I'm going to play after 3. Please don't try and turn your equipment up to hear this. You won't, and I'm going to turn it down on YouTube a bit anyway. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so you can see the sine wave is playing, but you can't hear anything. But if you look at the metering over here, it's peaking up at around about -2 dB, and even the average is about -5. So that's a pretty loud sort of signal. It gets really interesting when you look down here at the compressor that I've put on that channel. You can see that the compressor is just on all the time because that is actually, the computer is hearing it as a pretty loud sort of source. So That's a sort of extreme example. We don't make music out of sine waves, but it does demonstrate the point that there are things that you can't hear which your computer can hear. So back to the song itself. You'll be glad to hear it's not made up of sine waves, it's made up of instruments. It's a fairly typical sort of song setup, and I'm just going to play you a bit of the chorus so you can hear what we're dealing with.
And I don't buy what I've been sold, that happiness is made of gold, or another one can fill it.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with the main guitar. I'm going to solo it, and we're going to have a look at what my process is for putting a high-pass filter on an instrument like this. So I'll pull up Fab Filter. So I'm just going to start off by just listening to the guitar by itself, and I'm going to be moving this this high-pass filter backwards and forwards until it's not making a difference to the sound. So it's very obvious up here that it's cutting a lot out. I'll keep moving it down. You can hear here that it's really not making much difference, so I'll leave it there. Now that's generally the point where I'm going to want to use a high pass filter. It's not affecting the sound of the instrument, but there's a lot of information which is cutting out down here. Now, it's not always easy to hear the point where it cuts in. So what I sometimes like to do, in fact what I always like to do, is switch this from a low cut filter over to a high cut filter. Now when I play the track again, we're going to see all of that information being played in the low end, but we really can't hear anything. Now this is sometimes an easier way to hear your kind of cut off point. If I begin to move it up, okay, you start to hear something around about here. So I can push it up to about there. So if the first method isn't really working for you, you can't really hear the point where you want it to kick in, then this is a much easier way, I think, of doing it. Once you've found that point, then you can switch it back to, in this case on Fab Filter, a low cut filter. However, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and put this high cut filter at this kind of frequency, but I'm going to do it to every single instrument in the track. Not at the same frequency every time. I'm going to pick a frequency which suits that instrument. I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes when I've done that, and we'll see what we've got. Okay, so I've gone through that process now, and I've actually got a high cut filter on every single channel in the song. So this means that I should only be able to hear all of the information I don't want anymore. So let's play the track and see what we've got. So as you can probably hear, not much at all. You shouldn't really be able to hear much. It will depend on what kind of speakers you're using. You might just be able to hear a little bit of a rumble. But you can see that there's a fair amount of activity going on over here on the level meter, and with that, if that's put together with the rest of the signal that you would hear without these filters, then there's a chance that your compressors and your limiters, especially in your mastering stage, will be kicking in when they really don't need to. And so sometimes you will find, if you go through this process, that you do create a reasonable amount more headroom in your mastering. You can actually get your song to sound a fair amount louder without actually doing as much limiting or compressing. So now that we've gone through that process, I'm now going to flick all these around the other way so that they're doing their actual job, which is as a high pass filter on all of the tracks, and we'll see how it sounds. So I've now switched around all of those high cut filters and switched them to low cut filters, which is what we actually want. So we now should be able to actually hear our track again. So let's have a listen.
I don't buy what I've been sold, that happiness is made of gold, or another one can.
So you probably can't remember what the track sounded like before. So what I'm going to do is just make a couple of recordings now of how it sounded before, how it sounds now. I can't easily switch all of the filters off here in Studio One, so I'm just going to do a quick run, and I'll do an A/B comparison for you so you can hear the difference, if any.
I don't buy what I've been sold, that happiness is made of gold, or another one can can fill your soul. No, I don't buy what I've been sold. I don't buy what I've been taught. You laid the trap, now you've been caught. Slowly dying with a thought that you've been killed by what you bought.
So hopefully what you can see from this process is there's really no difference in the sound, but the amount of information which is getting sent to processors such as compressors or limiters is reasonably significant. It will depend on which song you're mixing, what kind of genre you're mixing as well. So this is not a hard and fast rule, guys. It's something that you need to use using a combination of your brain and your ears for this. But I do think it's a really, really useful process in my experience for getting a bit more headroom, especially at the mastering stage, where you can really use this to get the perceived volume of your track up without actually raising the volume. Okay folks, so thanks for watching this video, and I really hope that this helps you in future with your mixers. If you've got any questions or queries at all, or I didn't explain anything well enough, then please do ask in the comments below and I'll try and answer each and every one of you. You never know, your question may help someone else who's too shy to ask, so please do ask questions. Now, if this is the kind of content that you're interested in, home recording, plugins, doors, gear and giveaways, then please do subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube so you can hear about my future videos, and I will see you next time.